Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another Supercoach Insider podcast. My name is Swizz, and we are walking through our team discussions at the moment. We're up with the Fremantle Dockers, and no better person to represent Fremantle. We have all the way across from Perth, Damo. How are you, mate?
I'm doing well, thanks, Swizz. Yeah, always good to talk footy with you, and now I get to talk about my beloved Dockers.
Yeah, well, that's the theme this year, is trying to get some passionate supporters on. And I know how much you love those Dockers over there. So I'm hoping big things for you this season. I'm a bit of a fan. Do admit that I think everybody's either one way or the other in Perth, and I'm definitely on the purple train more than the your neighbours over there. So hopefully you guys get a bit of success, and potentially with this lineup this year and the fixture, it could be looking good. We'll start off with a little bit of the expectations here, mate. What are your expectations for the 2025 season after a little bit of disappointment there at the end last season?
Yeah, end of last season wasn't good. I mean, we can talk about the injuries, but in the end, there just wasn't enough. There just wasn't enough given in the back half of the season for the team to have played finals. I think if they got in, it would have been straight out anyway. They would have played Brisbane in Brisbane, and we all know what happened with Brisbane. So I think possibly missing out might have been okay in the end, because we've seen that the team can't really rally when they're missing some key players, which is something that they'll have to learn to do in the off season. Something that they'll have to build on, like an experience, and another preseason for a few guys will probably help with that. But yeah, I mean, expectations for this season, it's got to be finals. I think the expectation should be as high as top six. They should either be hosting an elimination final or qualifying hosting an elimination final or qualifying for a qualifying final.
Yeah, and I actually think it could be as good as top four with the potential fixture, especially the start of the season. Like, they've got to get off to a great start, and as you can see there, we've got the first 5 games listed. So Freo, like many of the teams in the comp, 10 of them, they've got the round 0 bye, and then they have their actual bye later on in round 13. But outside of Geelong, which is always hard down at Sleepy Hollow, but Freo do have a decent record down there. And playing the last year's grand finals, but that's at home. But yeah, Sydney, West Coast, and the Bulldogs all at Optus, and then you get my boys, who I'm not expecting too much from this year, over at Barossa. There's potential there. Like, you'd be trying to back yourself in to win those 3 Optus, and then the Richmond games. 4-1 would be a good start to the year.
Yeah, I think 4-1 should be the aim. 5-0 would be even better, but I mean, 4-1 should be what they aim for. West Coast early in the year, it might be one of those games where the second half plays a part, because no one will really know what Andrew McCalter's trick bag is full of just yet. But I think 4-1 should be the expectation. I think 3-2 would be probably would be at least what they should be coming out of those 5 games with.
Yeah, and for sure. And I think that's why I'm pretty bullish on a couple of these Fremantle players in my starting squad, just because of their early fixture. Like, the double games is interesting. It's probably not the best run when you think, having the grand finals in Sydney twice, but then new coach, do they have a little bit of regression? Who knows? The Bulldogs are always in the mix. But can they actually pull together? Port Adelaide is sort of in a similar boat, just I guess from coaching point of view. Like, if Freo were to miss again, you would think the Jungle Drums would beat pretty loudly for the coach over there in Longmuir, and where the Port Adelaide the same boat with with Hinkley. And then the Pies, they're probably a very disappointing year compared to what their standards have been in recent years too. So you'd expect them to be better. So there is some tough doubles there compared to some of the other sides. But in saying that, if Freo put up their best performances, they could potentially win all those games as well.
Yeah, I think one of the most disappointing parts of last season was not being able to close out games. There were heaps of games where they went with a lot of teams, but just couldn't quite get over the line in that last quarter. I think the Essendon game is a massive example of that one. That game was basically in hand until that final quarter when Essendon really got on top. And then there was a few other games like the Collingwood draw.
Collingwood game, yeah.
The Collingwood draw was another one where if they had kicked straighter and taken their opportunities, then they might have been able to, get over the line there. So that's already 2 extra wins that, perhaps they could have had last season. So ideally in season 2025, those are the sorts of games that they put to bed, and hopefully with the addition of, Shy Bolton, who is going to be at ground level, some ground level threat that they've been lacking, more so when Lachie Schultz left, but probably lacking for a little while, should help them and should just make that forward line just that little bit more potent.
Yeah, and you make up a good point there, and we'll get into the team in just one moment. But what we won't see there listed, because we are focusing on those first 5 games, but straight after that, it is Melbourne away. But Melbourne could be anything, but I expect them to be probably lower in the down compared to some of the other sides. Crows at home, Saints, and then the Pies at home. We just talked about the Pies, could be anything, but so there is some good games there at Optus where you'd expect again that Freo should be right in it. So I feel like it's a really good first half of the season. And if you're looking at Fremantle players, that's the kind of time you want to start with them because of that juicy draw.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, you haven't talked about it yet, but the second half of the season is pretty good as well. I think they only travel maybe 6 times after their bye. So that's another thing that goes in their favor. They've got the away game against North Melbourne in Perth. So I think after their bye, there's not a lot of travel, because they've also got their derby again. They've got a few home games in a row, which they haven't usually had. So this fixture's actually been really kind to them, even if the opponents haven't been. And it's kind of the concession that you have to make. Do you want a good travel schedule, or do you want an easy fixture? And I think the travel schedule is what the Dockers have opted for in this, because teams do get a little bit of a say, but yeah.
And the only thing I'll say from the devil's advocate and put there, the only real negative is comes Supercoach finals, where it's Carlton at home, Port away, Lions at home, and Bulldogs away. So that's probably not the best finish. From maybe a Freo perspective, it is if you're already entrenched in that top 4 or around that mark, and you can actually have some games against other teams that should be featuring at the end of the season, because that would probably get you a bit more hardened for finals. I wouldn't want to be in the situation where sort of Freo are 8 or 9 hanging on and probably facing those teams. But outside of that, as you said, the draw has been very kind. Yeah,
those last few games, I mean, we could say that Freo don't want to be 8 or 9 and hanging on, but before the last month of last season, they were 5th or 6th, and then lost all 4, and then ended up 10th. So I don't think it matters where they are on the ladder if they're not up to putting those games away and proving that they're getting their form in tune for the finals. Then maybe they don't deserve to make the finals again. And then, as you say, the doldrums will be beating for Justin Longmuir, which, if there's not a positive record at the bye, I wouldn't be surprised if they kind of tap him on the shoulder and put Jamie Graham in charge for the back half of the season.
Yeah, and you'd want a positive record with that fixture and that. If it's not, then I agree. I think clubs are pretty ruthless, and it'd be a pretty nervous time around the bye period if things aren't in order. All right, we'll jump over into the team. So I've got it listed there now. I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that, but I've gone with Ryan Pearce, Chapman, Clark, Cox, Walker. I think Clark was a real standout for the Dockers last year. We knew why they wanted to target him from Geelong, and he really did show it. So I think it continued to be big things. Sharp was a great addition on that wing, bit of speed. Young, who's just signed for feel like 50 years, and he'll probably be playing till he's 65. Massive contract. Congratulations to the young fella, but I think he's now the longest contract in the AFL. So, well done there. O'Driscoll, and then my boy Shea Bolton comes in, so it'll be interesting to see how he goes. But we know at his best, Yeah, he's an absolute superstar in that forward half. And even in a poor Richmond team, yeah, he kind of checked out bits last year, but he still, won the goal kicking. So he'll add a lot. A fit Tracy and a miss are very important for that structure. Tracy just started to stamp his authority on the competition. Frederick's exciting. We know Luke Jackson's exciting too, and his ability to cover Darcy whenever he's injured is, there's no second ruck like that in the league. So, yeah, he does bring a real X factor. Swilikowski's been a real find, a guy that's come through the VFL. And I think having Bolton there just takes that pressure off because after, as you said, losing Shields, there was probably a lot on his shoulders last year. And I thought he stood up pretty well, but he's not like the superstar number one small forward, and that will help. Shrek, it's all about his body. Apparently, he's dropped something like 15 Ks. And we'll go into him in a little bit more detail in a moment. The superstars in Sarong and Brayshaw. And then I've got Wagner, Johnson, the superstar, Nate Fife, and Sturt, because I thought Sturt deserved to keep his spot just because of how well he stood up last year. And you could raffle the sub. You've got Erasmus, there's a few other players, but I put Amira just for that experience who can come on and sort of give something. But, it's there is a bit of depth around now, which that's why we're a bit more bullish on Fremantle. Mate, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be surprised if Josh Draper actually comes into the 23 in some capacity, and whether that means Heath Chapman plays further up the ground or they move Jordan Clark further up the ground, I'm not quite sure. But I think Josh Draper will come in and free up Luke Ryan so that Luke Ryan isn't playing a third tall, can be less accountable if he was accountable in the first place. But yeah, so I think Josh Draper surprised people last season in his development, and I think there's a big chance that he's in the 23 come round one. I don't know how they fit him in, but I think even though he's 197 centimeters and about 100 kilos, he's got the running capacity to pretty much play anywhere. So he's almost like a taller Heath Chapman in a way. So maybe they bring him in to free up a Chapman and a Clark and a Ryan. And, Brandon Walker, he usually takes the best small, so they won't be shipping him out either.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Walker's not the one. I would maybe it's just like, say, a Sturt, for example, and then Fife's more looked at as that forward option more than he's obviously midfield that he was still playing last year.
Yeah, so if we move up the ground, I agree with Sharp, Young, and O'Driscoll in that centre line, Bolton, Tracy, and Frederick in that half forward line. It's really just the interchange that is creating the most debate, because I think Corey Wagner might be the perfect sub candidate because he's got that burst of speed and he can play wing, half forward, half back. He would give them a little bit of burst if he came on as a sub late in the game and a bit of extra leg speed, some kind of tenacity that they might want late in a game. Whereas Jager O'Meara, Sam Sturt, even Nat Fife, those three guys may not have played as many games last season as they did if some other players were fitter and there wasn't that reshuffling of the back line and then earlier in the season and then the forward line later in the season. So yeah, I'm not sure if O'Meara and Sturt play early on. Erasmus, he was a star in the Peel Grand Final, and I think that they'll try and find a spot for him somewhere. How they fit him in, I'm not sure. Does he take Matthew Johnson's spot? I'm not entirely sure, but they're talking about Matthew Johnson getting some inside minutes. So then where does that move Fife to? There's all these things about the interchange that it's going to be really interesting to see how they shape up, because they also drafted Murphy Reid, who David Walls rated as a top 10 talent, wouldn't be near their pick. And now they've been able to get him into the club. So do you leave a top 10 talent sitting on the shelf, or do you actually put them in your team straight away? And then that makes you wonder if someone like a Sam Switkowski or a Michael Frederick are as safe as they seem.
Yeah, and so when I was kind of playing around with this, I originally had Erasmus, in the sub position, because I thought they've got to try to get him in. Murphy Reid, he was one of the guys when I was looking through the draft night, I was going, I was really hoping we'd get him because he's the sort of guy that could just come in straight away and play. he could have potentially one of the best upsides out of this whole draft. But again, the hard thing is, he's a very classy midfielder. Freo don't need to rush him. They can, have him sit there in the resis and just continue to develop. But so we've seen in the past where some of these clubs up the top end have, brought these draftees in, and it has given the side a boost. They do bring, an energy to them. And we only have to see like the Australian cricket team that's on at the moment, like the difference that, say, Constance added straight up at the top of the order. It's that youthfulness that, it's really hard to just create that. And somebody like a Reed or an Erasmus could just add that spark that, might help. It might even just be 1 or 2%. For the rest of the group, but it can have a real difference to it. So I do agree with that bench. It's kind of hard. We know injury is always going to happen. So at some point, players start, like touch wood, it doesn't. There has been occasions where some clubs, I think the Swans might have been in it, where they pretty well the first 10 weeks might have had the same 25 or 26 playing. So we do see situations where that does happen, but. I think these players, if they are missing out early, some big waffle form, and just keep the pressure on and knocking on the door. And you wouldn't want to have 2 bad weeks in a row because, you could find yourself out of this team pretty quickly.
Yeah, and one guy that I've noticed isn't in your lineup is Michael Walters, and I just wonder if they'll want him in the team to kind of have him and Bolton feed off each other early on. I'm pretty sure that Walters has also lost a little bit of weight to try and get his speed back a little bit more in his later years. But like Fife, like O'Meara, I don't know how many games they're planning on all these guys to have. And if with Walters selected for the Indigenous game early on, does that take a game out of the yearly quota that they're expecting him to play?
Yeah, it could be. And if he absolutely lights that game up, I know it's going to be a little bit Harlan Trotters like, but if he looks like fit and firing, it's going to be hard to like sort of leave him out. So just like it's an unfortunate situation where, say, Sam Sulkowski just has got to start because they've got some of these other senior guys fit. It's going to be tough. I wouldn't want to be in the selection room if all these guys are fit come round 1, but it is a good problem to have, much better than the other way. So, that's why we're bullish. And, it's a big first couple of games with that. I'll move on to these Supercoach targets and very relevant. We'll start with the main guy in the middle, Caleb Sarong, absolute superstar. I potentially see him being the top 3 Supercoach players this year if he gets off to the start that I'm kind of expecting. What are your thoughts on Caleb?
I started him last season, and I really like him this season, but I'm not starting him just purely out of I've got the guy about 2 names down in my team instead. I agree that Sarong will be a target for me, but he's not a guy I'm starting straight away. And and Andrew Brayshaw that you've got second there. Sorry to take over your show.
Go.
I think later in the season we saw him step in when we saw the likes of Fife get tired, Young move forward a little bit later in games. But I just wonder if his role is going to expand a little bit further this year to make him more of a outside, inside sort of player, which he has the capacity to be. And I know that his preference is to be at the centre bounce, but when it was Sarong, Young, and someone else at the centre bounces, it wasn't the same player, getting the tag each time. Whereas when Brayshaw, Sarong, and Young were there, you knew that it was going to be fed to Sarong. You knew that Young and Brayshaw were there to kind of form the pathway, and it was just easy for other teams to get on top. So I think Andrew Brayshaw is a safe fade early on, and I don't think he will get too out of reach at any point to jump on him if he does gain some form.
It's interesting to say that because he's the one I've seen pop up in more teams that have been just sort of scrolling through then Sarong. Quite a few people are bullish on Brayshaw, and I don't know if it's just that slight discount because they kind of want a Fremantle player, where I had Sarong last year, enjoyed the ride, and because of just the way Fremantle's fixtures set up, I think the Swans game might be in the evening, but it's West Coast on the Saturday. Bulldogs on the Sunday, Richmond on the Sunday, and then I think after that there's still some Sunday fixtures. The Melbourne game. Oh, so Melbourne game, you come into the Adelaide game. So they actually end up getting some Friday and Thursday nights. So you've got the backup captaincy early on with Sarong, and then later on you've actually got him as a vice captain option. So that is one of the other reasons why I quite like him too, because he can double up as both, which we always know it's good to have a solid either VC or backup with the captaincy. But yeah, as you said, the third guy on that list at 546 does present quite a lot of value, and you're not going to invest such a large contract in somebody if you're just going to have him plodding along at half back or something like that. So this guy is the future. Tell us about Hayden Young, mate.
Yeah, so we kind of got sucked in earlier last season. We knew that he was going to get midfield time, but we didn't know what kind of role he would have, and he kind of had that Josh Dunkley run with tagging role early on. But once he got a bit more freedom, it was pointed out by someone, it might have been on TV even, that the way that his season was progressing was mirroring that of Bontempelli a few years ago. And I'm not saying that Hayden Young's going to come out and average 128 and, get to 700K, but he might be 100K underpriced. That's kind of what I'm saying. And if he can get to like 115 average, which just had to look over to see what that price would be, but if he can get to 115 average and you're paying 546 for him, that's bargain territory.
Oh, of course. And like, we know he's an absolute tackle machine. Freo, and the comparison's right, because it does feel like it's Neil, Dunkley, McCluggage in there. Brayshaw with that in and out game like with Hugh has. And then, Sarong is the Lockie. Neil picks up the 35 touches for fun, is that barometer. And then, you've got Hayden Young, who's the Dunkley type, and, is bigger body, tackles, does all the great defensive stuff, but at the same time still finds it easy to rack up 25 plus touches, which is a beautiful combination to have. So it does look like Brisbane, just, I won't say 2.0, but, just how they've set up their whole run over the last few years and developing into this midfield. And we know Young does go on sort of runs too. Like, he had a period there, he threw out a 132, 119, 114 in 3 weeks in a row. Later in the year, he had 125, 110, 109, 117, 125, and 105. So there is some good patch of consistency. And just the thing that we're kind of looking at is, like, he had the 62 against North, and as you said, role dependent earlier on. He did have a poorer game against the Swans middle of the year. Both his games against the Swans were a bit poorer from a Supercoach perspective. But just as natural development for him, that's going to get better, and that, those 60s become 75, and all of a sudden his average, we're not talking about a guy who's averaging 101 for the season, but it might be 105 to 110. And if it's 110, all of a sudden, you're in the conversation for the, as in some of that top 10 midfielders. And not only that, but even if you're potentially looking at flipping guys that you buy and stuff like that, he can actually still make some decent catch. And like, I was just sort of having a look at the midfielders from last year, and you've got Bont's the outlier at 126, and then you go down to sort of Butters at 120, who's in that sort of same area as Neil, Treloar and Sarong. But sort of after, sort of Zach Merritt there at 115, it really dropped off, and there was sort of a big bunch of them, Dunkley, Cripps, Brayshaw, LDU, Steele, Walsh. The list goes on, who are all around that 1.7 to 1.11 mark. There's no reason why Hayden Young couldn't bump himself up to, 107 is only 6 points away. So, that's an extra, tackle and kick, or tackle and handball a game. So he's definitely got that sort of in him. And you might be right there at a very juicy 546.
Yeah, I'm a massive Hayden Young fan, and with him locked away long term, I might have to get a jersey with his number on the back.
Yeah, I think a few Fremantle supporters will probably be doing that now. Still in the midfield, and this guy is always on our discussion. And I think people are sort of looking at the rucks, the news about Gawn with that sort of preseason injury, and obviously just everyone's getting older, and it's just a fact of life and footy career that, the older you get, the harder it is to continue to back up and play 23 games. We know, sort of Sean Darcy for a ruck is just coming into his absolute prime now. And the only thing that's stopping him from being an absolute lock in our teams is just he's been his body for a long time. For a guy who's 200 centimeters, naturally he's going to be a big guy, but he's weighed sort of between that 110, 115 Ks. I know the AFL don't like talking about weights anymore, but he's always been a very big lad, and apparently has shrunk down to about 100 Ks, maybe even slightly less than that, but looking super fit. And maybe that less, carrying that around every game will help him get around the ground even more, and more importantly, stay on the park for a longer periods.
Yeah, so when he was drafted, I believe he was about 111, 112 kilos. So he was already a big lad as a junior. And then when he got to Freo, he put on some muscle, but didn't really lose any of his baby weight. So I think he got out to like 120 kilos without losing anything, but only adding muscle to what he had. And it meant that he was carrying around quite a lot, but he was almost that immovable object that made him so effective in the ruck early days, which probably was good for his development in the end. But now it's meant that he's carrying around. It's meant that he's been susceptible to knee injuries, leg injuries, ankle injuries, foot injuries, because he's got that massive extra weight on top of him. And you look at guys like Brodie Grundy, Max Gawn, even Toby Nankervis has slimmed down a little bit. Jordan Sweet, Tim English, these guys aren't massive lads. Like, they're actually quite athletic in their stature now. And to have Sean Darcy lose a massive amount of weight in the offseason to reduce the risk of his injury, that just makes him a little bit more attractive and probably more up to speed with the modern ruckman. And people will say that they don't want to pick him because of Luke Jackson, but Luke Jackson actually hasn't affected Sean Darcy's scoring. It's been his match fitness. It's been his injury troubles that has affected it mostly. And yes, Luke Jackson will get ruck minutes. Luke Jackson will attend some centre bounces, and Sean Darcy will rest a little bit. But his loss of weight will actually make it easier for him to rest forward and play that Luke Jackson role when Luke Jackson is in the middle. There's two sides to that coin. That sure, Luke Jackson might get some ruck minutes, but Sean Darcy's not going off the field now. He's going to the forward line with that new frame to try and sink a few points and clunk a few marks. And Sean Darcy, more often than not, if he's lining up for goal, that ball's going through the middle. He's actually got a really nice set shot. So I think losing weight has only added to Sean Darcy's arsenal, not reduced the effectiveness of how he's going to be as a ruckman.
And that's the big thing with rucks. It's about how you can manage them. Do they need to just go off and have their rest? And sort of, it does make it sort of difficult. And sometimes they're the ones, if you've got the two ruck, maybe subbed out, because we've seen that with Geelong. They've done that in the past because they want the freshen up, and then one of the rucks will go for that whole last quarter. Collingwood would have done that before with Mason Cox gets subbed off at 3/4 time. So Darcy Cameron's had his rest going in so he can run out that last quarter to give that bit more freshness, because sometimes you're a little bit too tall. But the actual the other ruck, or the main ruck going forward, doesn't offer a lot. But yeah, if he's able to sort of get around the ground, or at least get moving through those forward patterns, and I think that's the big thing. So if he can work with a Miss and Tracy, and they can work out who's leading where, and a bit of forward craft, Sean Darcy is going to be a very hard matchup for a third defender. And some teams do play sort of that smaller third defender who might be 190 centimeters. And if you've got a guy who's 202, 203 centimeters, who's got the ability to clunk a mark, or even do the ruck work, like say, Tommy Hawkins, we've seen for a number of years, goes and does the forward ruck work. Jackson's up the ground, and Darcy's got the ability to do that. Who's going to go up against him unless you're sending the other ruck down, and then that just makes their workload harder. So it does add more to his game, because he is spending more time on the ground. We've talked about their fixture too. And if you've got a couple of games where you're beating up, so say hypothetically is Richmond, and they want Jackson to Jackson gets a bit more run on the ball. Well, Richmond aren't going to have the defenders to go with Darcy throughout if he is spending that larger percentage up forward too. So, yeah, I think it's important for them going forward, and mainly for his career, because we know what this guy can do. Like, he's in his career, he's put out 5 scores over 150, 5 scores over 139, between 139 and 149 as well. So he's always had the high ceiling. And we saw that with that day where it was at 193, just like ridiculously good. So he's going to be 26, 27 this year. It's just the absolute prime for a ruck. And if he's fit in firing, it just adds another string to the bow, which, he'll be able to compete against, the best rucks, which are, Cherry, Grundy, Gawn, and, to have the chop out from Jackson. Yeah, I think if he was in the 400s and that, I'd be seriously looking at him. 529, it'd have to take a big preseason, I'd have to say it, but at the same time, he's definitely still on that list of rucks because, as we said, Gawn, question marks, and quite a few people, including myself at the moment, have a R2 who's quite cheap. So looking to see who sort of steps up. There's question marks about DeConning from Carlton. It's a good price point, but still shares the ruck with Pitternet. We saw the sort of up and down form with Grundy last year. So nobody yet sort of kind of put that hand up for R2. Marshall is an option, but they're talking about the same thing, about him possibly doing a bit more time forward. They've picked up probably the best ruck in the draft as well in Dobson, and also looking at a supplement player too. So, I think there is potential there for him to be a dominant second ruck for us in our R2 position. And even if you kind of look at some of that draw, the Swans, who are they going with? Geelong, who are they kind of going with in the ruck? West Coast will probably have Flynn. So 3 games to start off with. Darcy could go bang, bang, bang. And all of a sudden, we're looking at a guy who could be averaging, 110, 115, 120 in the first 3 rounds. And some people will be like, well, maybe then jumping on too late because you might have missed a really good Sean Darcy score.
Yeah, and you do pose a good point there with the rucks. Almost everyone has a question mark next to them about a role going forward. So with Sean Darcy, you know that his role's only going to expand, whereas with the other rucks, you kind of have the question mark of will their role diminish. So at 529K, he's someone that I think will enter a lot of discussions, especially if he puts together some really promising preseason performances.
Exactly. All right, and into the forward line, my boy, Mr. Bolton. It's a brilliant pick up. He's given us a lot of joy over at Richmond, and I know the Fremantle Dockers supporters are going to absolutely love having him. Absolute barometer player, can do a bit of everything. What are your thoughts about Shai Bolton as a potential starting pick there at 416? Because there's definitely meat on the bone.
I wouldn't be starting him. I think he had success ascending centre bounces at Richmond, but I think he's going to start life at Freo as a forward half specialist. Just to begin with, he might get some centre bounces later in the year, but I think what they've brought him in for is to be that ground level threat up forward and to have every opportunity available to him to crumb, kick goals off the ground, all that sort of thing. So I think his price is going to go down before it goes up. Let's just say that.
Yeah, and that's fair. We did see the 2023 season, which wasn't a great year for the Tigers, and he did put up some monster scores. But yes, he did have some time pushing up the ground. If I do see him in that preseason role where he's starting half forward and charging to the midfield, where it's, say, Sarong gets the ball and then it's offload potentially to a Bolton, and that's the kind of role he plays, it does make me more interested. Where if he's more, he's hovering around, starting in the forward pocket, doing, Charlie Cameron kind of things, then it'll be an absolute no. So it will be role dependent. You kind of want to see it. And Freo's kind of in that way. It would be a team I would have loved to see play in round 0, and then potentially have their round 2 bye or round 3 bye or something like that, just to have a look at that. That's the sort of player I would love to have 2 or 3 weeks looking at it and going, okay, this is a guy I want to get in my side before they beat up on a few other teams. But unfortunately, we don't get that option. So it will be dependent on how that sort of setup is. And the other hard thing is there are plenty of mouths to feed in Freo and potentially in that forward line. So, we know Tracy and Amiss are going to be the targets. But I think it's just a nice addition to the fact that if that ball hits the ground, Bolton's going to add just a real X factor at the ball.
Yeah, he's a see ball, get ball, kick goal kind of small forward. He doesn't try and he's almost selfish for a good reason. There's the Dockers don't have that small forward who goes and gets the ball when it hits the ground. They all kind of raffle it off, and I think that's probably been what's been missing. Schultz kind of had that same thing, but he was more defensive. Sam Switkowski's more defensive. Michael Frederick's doesn't really have that impulse enough, and that's why he usually moves up the ground a little bit. Whereas if Bolton's inside 50, that ball's probably going to go one way or the other, and that's either through the goals or all the way up the other end because there hasn't been a defensive defensive act. But I mean, with all the other guys around him, you think once the ball's in the forward half of the ground, it's going to stay there until a score goes through.
Yeah, exactly. And it's something I've been saying for a while. I know Grimo and I, sitting there watching Richmond games, have talked about the fact that we've been expecting sort of the Stevie Mill, Mark Lacroix, 10 to 12 goal game out of Shea Bolton one time in his career. It's disappointing we're not going to get to see that in Richmond colours, but he's going to do it one day because, as you said, he's selfish in front of goals. But you sometimes need a player like that. He'll on one day he'll kick 1 goal 6, but then he could come out and kick 6 or 7 on any other given day, and it's not going to phase him what the opposition is too. So, he could have a shot. If he's going to have a shocker, you hope it's against one of the bottom teams because he's got the ability to absolutely turn a game against one of the top sides and very hard to match up against. And it's probably good for Frederick because, he's going to get more opportunities because they're obviously going to be all focused on Bolton around goal, or even if it's one of those midfielders who's pushing up into the forward line. So I don't know which one it will become the more attacking midfield, and I think that's the next step for Fremantle's development too. Is one of those midfielders kicking that 20 goal season, 25 goal season that we've seen some of the other better teams do. But you wouldn't. I think there'll be a lot of focus on Bolton around those stoppages, and maybe it's a Sarong Brayshaw that they lose that 5%, 10% focus on him because they're worried about defending Bolton. And all of a sudden, they're getting on the end and kicking an extra goal a game. So it does offer a real point of difference. And I think I probably, as I said, agree with you because it's going to be hard to start. But the only thing that changes my mind if he's the one pushing up and being that first player to get the receive off the midfielder.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, the last one there, and I've added him in there, even though he's not technically in my 23, but there's a lot to love about this player, and it's Neil Erasmus, mate. You've already talked about he hit that Peel Thunder game. What are your thoughts? Is he somebody that it's worth having a look at, or we just wait and see after he's, when he gets the opportunity and plays 2 games and hope that he's not a sub candidate? What's your thoughts on him?
If he's selected, I would put him on field. That's I think he's got the sort of game that if he gets selected and is playing a full game, he should be on your field. The role that he played for Peel in that final, he didn't have to attend a lot of center bounces in that game and still ended up on 140 ranking points or something ridiculous like that. I think if he gets his shot this year, he's going to be one of those rookies that maybe is one of the last that we move on or upgrade from.
I like it, mate. We're always looking players like that. One that I didn't list, which you've actually also recruited, talking about small forwards. Do you think Quinton Narkle gets a look in at any point, mate?
I don't think so. I don't think so. I I think Quinton Narkle was almost the cherry on top for Shea Bolton to come across because they're good mates, and Quinton Narkle is probably going to be a really nice depth option for us, and I wouldn't be surprised if he does force his way in through some good waffle performances, but I don't think he's in the early plans.
Yeah. And actually, just going back to Erasmus there, because you did make a good point. Yeah, it was a game against Collingwood at the MCG. So he scored a 126. So something we always talk about is we want to see ceilings, and for a young fella there to have that sort of ceiling in a game, it showed that he can do it. It just needs the opportunity to do so. If, as you said earlier, if Brayshaw is more inside and out, and they even potentially look at pushing him out, and go away from Fife, and maybe Johnson's getting minutes. Does Erasmus get some minutes in there as well? And they try to keep, I guess, oppositions guessing with the sort of their makeup of their centre bounce.
Yeah, I don't know if Erasmus is going to get midfield time, but when he has been getting midfield time, he is that big body that can go through there, and I think ideally in the end, he's the guy that replaces Fife in that through the middle and with time up forward. So big watch on whether he makes the round one team. I hope he does, and I think he will, but I don't know how the inside of Justin Longmuir's mind works.
Yes, it's the big question there. What goes on up top? Have a lot of coaches as well. Always sort of, but I'm sure there's a big great plan there. I think that covers Fremantle. Thank you so much for joining us, Damo. Yeah, you go on, mate. Go.
There's two guys who you haven't listed who
yep
pretty popular in some starting teams. You got Luke Ryan, 628k. He's going to be in a lot of people's starting teams because of their single buy in the middle of the year where they only share it with one other team, and then they've got that easy matchup first up. So even if those teams do charge forward, those forward lines means that he might get a free roam and some nice intercept marking points at least from those games. And we know that when he gets off the chain, he can do 120, 150, 180 points sometimes, like we saw in that Richmond game earlier in the season. And Jordan Clark, well, he added 20 points onto his average last season with some extra help and, a fitter back line, with Heath Chapman starting the year in good fashion and all that. Could Jordan Clark make another jump and be another, Jack Sinclair type sort of a backline option for us in Supercoach? So
I should apologise there because definitely they were on my actual list, and but it's just kind of a little bit more of Ryan's price. I was kind of focusing on some of those other targets, but definitely deserve talking. Like Ryan, and that was for total points, was 5th overall last year. I didn't think his body had that in him, and really proved a lot of naysayers wrong there because we've always seen the scoring ceiling. So if he can hold up again, because as you're right, he just cherry picks kickouts, does whatever he wants, taking intercept marks in that back line. It's the Fremantle version of James Sicily, but from a Supercoach perspective, it's great as an owner. And we didn't really get the absolute stinker of a game last year. There was a couple of games in the 70s, 68 late, but it was a big consistent year. And if Freo are, on the better side of a lot more wins, there might not be a lot that changes there. And you're completely right about his mate in the backline, Jordan Clark, saying it earlier, great pickup from Geelong. And depending a little bit, I think the role stays. Is there a little bit of adjustment to that? Maybe, but that could be a potential good thing if they give him a little bit more license to get up the ground, try to barrel in a couple of goals or something like that. But I think him off half back looked absolutely brilliant last year.
Yeah, I actually compared Jordan Clark to Jack Sinclair quite a bit. And I think if you're going to pay $592K for Jack Sinclair, but you're looking for an extra $30K to free up Sinclair down to Clark for that extra $30K in your starting team, I don't think you'll be missing much.
No, exactly. And again, like we talk ceilings and even our basement, our floor. And apart from that GWS game, which was a bit of a stinker game for a lot of the Fremantle players, where we scored a 60, and then there was a 60 against the Swans, which, it's been a bit of a common theme with some of the Freo scores. Most of the other games, real consistent. Like it's pretty well, mid 80s up to 120. So at least his standard deviation is pretty reliable, where you're going to get somewhere between 85 and 120 any given week, and that's kind of what you want from a defender. And if he can put just a little bit more on that basement and take a few of those games up to 90, that average, as you said, there could be 5-10 even more points on there.
Yeah, and he's not even 23 yet or 24 yet, so he's got plenty of time before he reaches his prime, and that's kind of that's a little bit scary.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I hope that's kept everybody happy. The Fremantle supporters out there, tell us what you think. If there are any changes you make to the super coaches, tell us if you have got anybody in your starting lineups at the moment. And Damo, thank you so much for joining me.
It's been good to be here, Swizz. Thanks.
No problems. Well, we'll move on to the next team coming up, which will be the Cats. Check that one out. But apart from that, guys, take care and we'll talk soon. Bye.